Welcome to Walking the Haftarah. I'm Tyler Merwin, and this is Torah portion MIKETZ. This week's Torah portion is Genesis 41:1 through 44:17. Our Haftarah this week is 1 Kings 3:15 through 4:1. MIKETZ means at the end of. As in our Torah portion, it opens with after or at the end of 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. In this week's Torah portion, we continue the Joseph narrative and more dreams. So let's do a quick rundown of our portion. The sages interpret the 2 whole years as meaning exactly 2 years to the day that the cupbearer was released from prison. Pharaoh has a few disturbing dreams that have him troubled. These dreams are about 7 good fat cows and 7 good fat ears of grain that are swallowed up by 7 ugly gaunt cows and 7 thin blighted ears of grain. None of the wise men or magicians of Egypt could interpret Pharaoh's dream. Then the chief cupbearer remembered Joseph. Joseph is cleaned up and brought before Pharaoh, who asked him if he can interpret his dream. Joseph answered Pharaoh, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." Genesis 41, verse 16. Pharaoh recounts both dreams to Joseph. Joseph explains that both of his dreams are actually one dream, and that God is telling Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows and good ears of grain are 7 years of plenty and prosperity for the land of Egypt. And the 7 bad cows and the 7 bad ears of grain are 7 years of famine that will be very, very severe. Joseph counsels Pharaoh to set a wise person over the land to store up grain during the years of abundance, so they will be able to endure the years of coming famine. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" Genesis 41, verse 38. Pharaoh appoints Joseph as viceroy and gives him Pharaoh's signet ring, and he's paraded through the land as ruler under Pharaoh. Joseph stored an abundance of grain in each of the cities, the quantity of which was beyond count. Pharaoh gives Joseph a wife, and she bores him 2 sons. The first is named Manasseh, which means forgetful, because this child helped him to forget his troubles of the past. His second born is Ephraim, which means fruitful, because Adonai has made him fruitful in the land of his sojourning. The 7 years of plenty pass, and the famine strikes all the lands. But there is bread in Egypt, thanks to Joseph. All those in Egypt and in the surrounding lands came to buy grain from Joseph. The famine was also affecting Canaan, so Jacob sends 10 of his sons to go buy grain from Egypt, but he kept Benjamin at home. His brothers show up before him to buy grain. He recognizes them, but they have no idea that they are dealing with the brother they sold away into slavery. Joseph deals harshly with them and accuses them of being spies in order to test them. He holds them for 3 days and then tells them to leave one of them locked up behind in Egypt, and that they should return back with their youngest brother to prove themselves. They speak amongst each other that this is a divine punishment for how they treated Joseph when they had sold him away. They did not know that Joseph understood them, for there was an interpreter between them. Then he turned away from them and wept. And he returned to them and spoke to them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes. Genesis 42, verses 23 and 24. Joseph had them all loaded with grain, and also placed all their money back in their sacks, and sent them on their way back to Canaan. They discover later that they had all their money returned, and they were all struck with fear, as they would be considered thieves of Egypt, where their brother Simeon was being held captive. They returned home to Jacob and told him the whole account. Jacob refused to let Benjamin go to Egypt, as he is all he has left of his beloved wife Rachel. After the famine deepens, and they have eaten through all of the provisions that they had gotten in Egypt, Jacob finally allows them to take Benjamin with them after Judah guarantees his own safety to him. Jacob then tells him, "Take double the money with you. Carry back with you the money that was returned in the mouth of your sacks. Perhaps it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise. Go again to the man. May El Shaddai grant you mercy before the man, and may he send back your other brother and Benjamin. As for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved." Genesis 43, verses 12 through 14. Upon returning to Egypt, they are summoned to Joseph's house to dine with him, but they fears because of the money that they had in their sacks from the first trip. Joseph tells them that he had got their original payment and there was no offense, and he releases Simeon back to them. At mealtime, Joseph really messes with their minds by seating them all in birth order, but he gives Benjamin 5 times the amount of food. With this, Joseph really starts to pour coals into his test, as he really wants to see how they will react to the other favored son of Rachel. First off, by showing him extra favor. Will they be jealous? The men's sacks are filled again with grain, and again their money is returned in their sacks, but also Joseph's silver cup is placed in Benjamin's sack. Sooner after they leave to go home, Joseph has them chased down for thievery of this cup. All are searched, and the cup is found with Benjamin. They all rent their garments and return back to Joseph. Joseph chastises them for taking his cup, and our portion ends with, "And Judah said, 'What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also in whose hand the cup has been found.' But he said, 'Far be it from me that I should do so. Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. But as for you, go up in peace to your father.'" Genesis 44:16. This brings us to our Haftarah this week, 1 Kings 3:15 through 4:1, or Melachim 1, 3:15 through 4:1. The Haftarah deals with King Shlomo, or King Solomon. Solomon was the new king and was doing righteousness in Adonai's sight. And he appeared to Solomon in a dream while Solomon was at Gibeon, making offerings to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And he asked him what he would like from the Almighty. Solomon answered, "Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this your great people?" 1 Kings, verse 3-9. Adonai was pleased with his request, and he grants it to him, and much, much more. After Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh tells Solomon all that he will do for him in his kingship in this dream, we get the opening verse of our Haftarah. "And Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Then he came to Jerusalem, and stood before the ark of the covenant of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, and offered up burnt offerings and peace offerings, and made a feast for all his servants." 1 Kings 3:15. The scriptures are full of unique words and unique phrases in the original Hebrew text. When the sages see these repeated in other places, they take notice and understand that there is a deeper connection somewhere between the texts. Many times, this will be the main tie-in between the Torah portion and the Haftarah, and that's the case with this week's Torah portion. The opening sentence we read in verse 15 said, "And Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream." The connection to our portion is just after we are told about Pharaoh having his 2 dreams in Genesis 41. At the end of verse 7, it reads, "And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream." This is the exact same Hebrew wording except for the name of the one having the dream. Pharaoh had just had a dream about what Adonai was going to do to his kingdom, and he gave him Joseph as his wisdom. Solomon just had a dream where Adonai was going to give Solomon the wisdom he desired for the needs that he would need for his kingdom. Now let's get back to the famous story that is this week's Haftarah. Then 2 prostitutes, or innkeepers, depending on your translation, came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, "O my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. Then on the 3rd day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth, and we were alone. There was no one else with us in the house. Only we 2 were in the house, and this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. And she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me while your servant slept, and laid him at her breast, and laid her dead son at my breast. When I arose in the morning to nurse my child, behold, he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, behold, he was not the child that I had borne." But the other woman said, "No, the living child is mine, but the dead child is yours." The first said, "No, the dead child is yours, but the living child is mine." Thus they spoke before the king. There's a slight nuance between the 2 accounts that Solomon picks up on in this heartbreaking story. The one telling the truth relates that my son is the living one, while the one lying places the emphasis on the dead one is yours. The true mother is focused on life, and the mother who lost the child is focused on the death of her child. But Solomon's solution will bring the truth to bear very clearly. Then the king said, "The one says, 'This is my son that is alive, and your son is dead.' And the other says, 'No, your son is dead, and my son is the living one.' And the king said, 'Bring me a sword.' So a sword was brought before the king. And the king said, 'Divide the living child in 2, and give half to the one and half to the other.'" Verse 23 through 25. This should have been a devastating decision for any mother that even cares the least bit for her child, or any child for that matter. Then the woman, whose son was alive, said to the king, because her heart yearned for her son, "O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means put him to death." But the other said, "He shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide him." Then the king answered and said, "Give the living child to the first woman, and by no means put him to death. She is his mother." Verses 26 through 27. The bitterness of grief for the woman who lost her child shows through in her statement that neither should have him, and that he should be divided. And all Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they had perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. Verse 28. Solomon was young, and he was now sitting in the place of his father, the mighty King David. Those are big shoes to fill. Adonai used this case to infuse confidence into the people of Israel, to know that even though he was young, that the Holy One was working actively through him. The people stood in awe at Solomon's wisdom, just like Pharaoh and all his court stood in awe at the wisdom of Joseph. And it says in 1 Kings 4:1 that King Solomon was king over all Israel. This last statement shows that the whole nation was now solidified under Solomon's reign, as he was relying on Adonai to direct him, just like his father, King David, did. So too, after Joseph was set up, and he made all the provisions in the years of plenty, all the people of the land revered him. This also reminds me of Yeshua. Yeshua was marveled at by all those of his day for having great wisdom and even great confidence to go with the wisdom. unlike that of the Pharisees. We await the day that He will bring the two sticks back together and unite us as one under His banner, as He will be King over all Israel. Let us pray for the Almighty to impart to us the mind of Yeshua, and to be wise like Yeshua and Joseph and Solomon. And let us also unite in Echad to be a unified force that can be wielded by the Holy One. I pray this teaching has been edifying. Let's lift up the name of the Holy One with love in Echad. Shalom.